The Cleveland Browns have now named their head coach, former Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken. However, the fallout from this hire could be much bigger than the hire itself. We're to talk about that up next here on No Buts About It. Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Butts, and you're watching No Butts About It. And the Cleveland Browns earlier today named Todd Monken as their head coach. And Monken is a respectable hire. He was the Ravens offensive coordinator since 2023, and the Ravens have had a pretty decent offense since 2023. In 2023, Lamar Jackson won the MVP. People would argue he should have won it in 2024. They did regress a little bit this year at times. There were some struggles, and he arguably did forget that Derrick Henry was his running back, which I know frustrated a lot of fans, understandably so, both in fantasy and just Ravens fans in general. I don't know if that was Monken, if that was a game plan created by John Harbaugh, or what that necessarily was. But ultimately, Todd Monken, I'd say overall, was a good offensive coordinator. He was respectable. The players seemed to like him. Lamar seemed to like him. There weren't a lot of negatives surrounding him at the time that he was in Baltimore. And so I understand why the Cleveland Browns would want to hire him, bring him in. You know, they've seen him a lot. They're in the same division. He doesn't have a ton of head coaching experience. His only head coaching experience is at Southern Miss from 2013 to 2015. He inherited a winless team, and ultimately he was able to turn them into Conference USA West Division champion in 2015 with a 9-5 record. But he just, you know, that doesn't mean a lot to me. I mean, it wasn't like it was a big school or anything like that. He did have some time at Georgia, I believe, as the offensive coordinator, and he won 2 national championships while he was there. And so, you know, this hire, I don't really know what to think about it. I know that he wasn't the front runner. They had a ton of other guys who they really wanted, like Grant Udinski with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who pulled his name out. And there were a few other coaches that pulled their names out because they didn't want to be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And the Cleveland Browns do have kind of a mess. Joe Camo and I talked about that, comparing the Cardinals and the Browns. And I thought the Browns was a little bit better, but it's still, you've got the Deshaun Watson situation. You've got 2 second-year quarterbacks now. The defensive side of the ball is cooking, but the offensive side of the ball is kind of struggling. They're going to be depending on a lot of rookies that I like. But, you know, those young guys, can they, you know, carry the team on their shoulders yet? And Todd Monken has been brought in to do that. However, I do think there's going to be some fallout from this situation, and that's what I want to talk about. But before we get into that, let's make sure you go down and you subscribe, because it helps us a ton. Like, it helps us out so much with like the algorithm and getting monetized and stuff like that, and allows us to put together more videos, better videos, when we are able to do this full time. And that's what our ultimate goal here is at this channel, is to be able to do this full time. Any support that you give us means so much, like literally so much. But let's talk about the possible fallout of the Todd Monken hire. Now, Todd Monken has been with the Cleveland Browns before. He was the offensive coordinator under Freddie Kitchens. I'm sorry, Browns fans. Yes, I put him up, but I'll take him down right now. He was the offensive coordinator under Freddie Kitchens. And when you Google Todd Monken, Browns offensive coordinator, this article is the one that comes up. It's a Bleacher Report article from 2020, where Monken was basically telling other coaches that the team was a complete mess. Basically, the game plan that they talked about all week was not what was being put into games. And, he just was very frustrating. Kitchens is the one who called the plays back then. So it wasn't necessarily Todd Monken who was calling the plays, who was causing issues with, Baker Mayfield and stuff like that. But he did end up elevating that offense a little bit. But it wasn't great. It wasn't great. Obviously, he was not happy with the team. And so now they're going to look at possibly moving on from another coordinator who I thought was going to get the job, and that is Jim Schwartz. The Browns defensive coordinator has been fantastic since coming in to the league in 20 or since coming into the Browns defense in 2023. He has, the best or not yards, points allowed per game since 2023. His defenses are not allowing a ton of points. The offense just wasn't putting up the points needed to win games, and that's what was holding them back. And so I thought Jim Schwartz was going to get it, especially after Grant Udinski pulled out. I was like, okay, there's not a ton of names here. Jim Schwartz has the experience. He was the Lions head coach. He's been with the team. The team seems to respect him a ton. It would make sense that Jim Schwartz is the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. I thought they were just going to promote him. And even if that's just, you promote him for 2 seasons, see what happens, because this guy has given you so much time and is so respected by the players on his side of the ball. And then you just bring in a really good offensive coordinator. Maybe that happens. That would have been what I did if I was Andrew Berry, but that's not what happened. And it kind of seems like Jim Schwartz thought that was what's going to happen too. He was reportedly around the facility, expected to be named the head coach very soon. He went through this long, laborious process that, a lot of coaches pulled themselves out of because of how crazy the process was. He was willing to do it. He had interviewed before back in 2019 when they fired Freddie Kitchens and ultimately hired Kevin Stefanski. He had hired through this process in 2020, not 2019. He got fired in 2019. You know how years carry over. Anyway, he'd interviewed for this job before, ultimately didn't get it, went somewhere else, came to the Cleveland Browns, stayed loyal to the Cleveland Browns. Jim Schwartz has been a head coaching candidate for a long time because of how good his role with the Browns has been. He has been the only good part of the Cleveland Browns. He has players that are loyal to him, like Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett loves Jim Schwartz. Myles Garrett returned to the Cleveland Browns arguably because of Jim Schwartz. And now, the year after you extend Myles Garrett, after you went through that entire contract situation, you're going to let, Jim Schwartz just walk away angrily? And he's livid, as the reports show. He is angry. And I get it. Again, it's like he was at a company. He's put in the time, he's put in the work, he's done his job. He hasn't really said anything while, losing games because of the other side of the ball. He's just done his job. And, they bring in this outsider who, again, maybe he does a good job, maybe he doesn't. This isn't Todd Monken's fault. I'm not blaming Todd Monken. In fact, Todd Monken supposedly wants to keep Jim Schwartz. And I would want to keep Jim Schwartz too, because he's a great coach. But I don't think Todd Monken's going to get to keep Jim Schwartz. Because I think Jim Schwartz is going to leave before his contract is up. And that is ultimately the crux of this hire. If I'm the Cleveland Browns ownership, if I'm Andrew Berry, the GM, does hiring Todd Monken make up for losing Jim Schwartz? I don't think it does. I don't think, based on where the personnel are in Cleveland, on the offensive side of the ball, you still have Deshaun Watson, who's getting paid a ton of money. Ownership may force him to start over Shador, so you may lose the developmental aspect there. You've got, not a ton to work with in terms of receivers. You've got Jerry Jeudy, who I believe led the league in drops or was up there. There are some young guys that I like, Harold Fannin Jr. being one. I think Isaiah Bond has some potential, but that offensive line has kind of started to, disintegrate a little bit. They struggled with injuries a ton last year on the line. The offensive side of the ball is going to take some time to, develop, to build up. And they do have 2 first-round picks that they could use on the offensive side of the ball. But does Jim Schwartz leaving trigger this mass fallout where players on the defensive side of the ball start requesting trades? Do we start seeing, Denzel Ward request a trade? Do we start to see, Myles Garrett request a trade? Does that happen? He was upset. He was not a happy camper last year when it came down to the extension. They ultimately got the extension done, and now this is happening. I don't know that the fallout is worth it. I don't know that you're going to be able to build up this offense because you may lose what the good stuff you had on the defense was. And that would be my concern if I'm the Cleveland Browns. However, I'm not the Cleveland Browns. I'm a Bengals fan. And as a Bengals fan, I'm kind of liking how things shaked out. I think Zach Taylor's kind of, he's going to be the only consistent head coach in the division. He has no choice but to, win the division at this point because Mike McCarthy doesn't move the needle for really anyone above Mike Tomlin right now. Jesse Minter is the biggest threat, but he's going to need time to develop his system. First year head coach. The Browns, we'll see what happens with the Browns. This is still new. This is still fresh, but let me know what you think down below. Do you think this was a good hire for the Cleveland Browns? Do you think Jim Schwartz will stay with the Cleveland Browns? And do you think the loss of Jim Schwartz is outweighed by the hire of Todd Monken? And until next time, go do something nice for someone.